My children called me a useless old man. They didn't know I'd already signed the papers, and this is my real-life story as lesson to others. I am 56 years old, born and raised in a small town in Ohio, where people still wave at strangers and believe a man's word should mean something. I never thought I would be the kind of man telling his life like this, but some days burn themselves into you so deeply that they demand to be spoken out loud. This is one of those days. The day I realized I was already dead to my own children. Not buried, not sick, not fatting away in a hospital bed, just erased. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day that looks harmless when you wake up. The sky was gray but calm, the air cool enough to feel honest. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a chipped coffee mug I had owned longer than my kids had been alive. The coffee had gone cold, but I kept holding it anyway because it gave my hands something to do. My hands were shaking, not from age, not from weakness, but from a feeling I had no name for yet. It was standing in my living room. My son leaning against the wall like he owned the place, my daughter sitting on the arm of the couch scrolling on her phone, barely looking at me. That couch was older than their careers. I bought it the year my wife and I finally saved enough to stop sitting on lawn chairs. That room held birthdays, Christmas mornings, scraped knees, late-night talks when nightmares woke them up crying. It was the room where I taught them how to take their first steps, where I ran behind a wobbling bike, yelling encouragement, until they pedaled on their own. And now they were laughing. Not laughing with me, laughing at me. It wasn't loud laughter, that would have hurt less. It was the kind of casual, careless laughter people use when they do not even realize they are being cruel. My son said it first, his voice flat, like he was stating a fact everyone already agreed on. He called me a useless old man, no anger, no hesitation, just words tossed into the air like trash. My daughter didn't stop him. She smiled, a small tight smile, and said something about how times had changed and how I would not understand anyway. That hurt more than the words themselves. The way she said it made me feel like an object left behind by progress, something outdated and inconvenient. I did not shout, I did not slam my hand on the table, I did not remind them of everything I had done. I just sat there, staring into that coffee mug, watching my reflection shake in the dark surface. In that moment, I understood something that hit harder than any insult ever could. In their eyes, I was already gone. They did not see a father. They did not see a man who survived loss. They did not see the nights I stayed awake, worrying about bills, or the mornings I woke up sore and exhausted, but went to work anyway. They saw a background figure, a placeholder, something temporary. I realized then that death is not always about a heartbeat stopping. Sometimes it happens when the people you love stop seeing you as human. The worst part was how normal they looked saying it. No guilt, no pause, just confidence. Confidence built on the belief that they no longer needed me, except for one thing they never said out loud: what I had. I remembered the day my wife died like it was stitched into my bones. I remembered holding my kids close, promising them I would always be there. And I was. I worked jobs that left my back aching and my hands cracked. I missed out on friends, on rest, on my own grief. I told myself it was fine because I was doing it for them. Every sacrifice felt lighter when I believed it mattered. But sitting there, listening to them talk about my irrelevance, I felt something shift. A quiet breaking inside my chest. It was not rage, it was clarity, the kind that comes when illusions finally give up. They kept talking, discussing plans, future ideas, things they wanted to do. They spoke like I was furniture, something solid that would always be there until it was not, and then someone else would deal with it. Not once did they ask how I felt. Not once did they notice I had gone quiet. I realized then that I had trained them to be this way. Not on purpose, but through years of always saying yes, always stepping in, always fixing things before they felt the weight of consequences. I had loved them so hard that I taught them love meant access, not respect. My son joked about how I should let them handle things now. He said it like a favor, like he was doing me a kindness by taking control. My daughter nodded, eyes still on her phone, already bored with the conversation. That was the moment my chest tightened, not from anger but from grief. Grief for the man I used to be in their eyes. Grief for the father they no longer saw. Grief for myself. I stood up slowly, my knees stiff, my body reminding me of every year I had given away without complaint. They barely noticed. I walked past them, into the hallway where family photos lined the walls. Smiling faces, younger faces, faces that once looked at me with trust and admiration. I paused in front of one photo. It was an old one. Me in work boots, arms around both kids, all of us laughing. I looked strong in that picture. Tired but proud. I remember thinking back then that if I ever got old, I hoped my kids would remember that man. Standing there, I understood they already had not. What they did not know, what they could not see through their confidence and assumptions, was that weeks before that afternoon, I had already signed the papers. I had done it quietly, without drama, without telling a soul, not out of revenge, but out of survival. I had sat in a small office with a lawyer who spoke calmly and listened carefully. I told him everything, about my family, about my fears, about the way I felt invisible in my own home. He did not judge me, he simply explained my options, and I chose the one that gave me my dignity back. Those papers changed everything. They were not loud, they did not announce themselves, but once they were signed, the future I had silently worried about disappeared. Control returned to my hands, steady and sure. So when my children laughed that day, when they dismissed me like an old coat hanging by the door, I already knew something they did not. The version of me they thought was weak had already made the strongest decision of his life. I walked back into the living room and sat down again. They finished talking and eventually left, still confident, still unaware. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and the house went quiet. I sat there alone, listening to the sound of my own breathing, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. I was not angry, I was not broken, I was awake. That was the day I realized I was already dead to them. And it was also the day I finally chose to live for myself. I wasn't always this quiet old man they laughed at. There was a time when my back was straight, my hands were steady, and my name actually meant something in this town. For more than 30 years, I worked like my life depended on it, because in a way, it did. I spent my days on construction sites before the sun came up, breathing in dust, lifting things my body had no business lifting, fixing broken places other people gave up on. I learned how to look at a rundown building and see potential, how to turn cracked walls and rotten floors into something livable again. People saw old houses. I saw opportunity. I saw a future for my family. I didn't chase comfort, I chased stability. While other families went on beach trips and posted smiling photos, I stayed back. Vacations were a luxury I told myself we didn't need. Birthdays were rushed dinners after long workdays. I missed school plays, parent meetings, and lazy Sunday mornings. Every sacrifice came with the same excuse whispered in my own head. This will pay off. This will matter. One day they'll understand. Back then, love meant providing. Love meant never letting the lights go out. Love meant making sure there was always food in the fridge and shoes on their feet, even if mine were worn down to the soul. I told myself that being present emotionally could wait, that once things were stable, I would slow down. I never realized how fast time runs when you keep telling yourself later. Then my wife got sick, not the kind of sick that scares you right away. The slow kind, the quiet kind, the kind that creeps into your life and changes everything without asking permission. I remember the night she passed like it happened yesterday. The hospital room was too quiet, the lights too bright. I held her hand and felt it go cold, and in that moment, a part of me died with her. But grief is a luxury when you have kids staring at you, scared and confused, waiting for you to tell them everything will be okay. So I didn't fall apart. I didn't let myself. I swallowed that pain so deep it settled into my bones. I became both parents overnight. I packed lunches, learned to braid hair, stayed up late helping with homework after 10-hour workdays. I cried alone in the garage so they wouldn't hear me. Men like me don't get space to break down. We get responsibilities. I promised myself I would never let them feel the absence of their mother in ways I could control. That meant more work, more hours, more saying yes when my body begged for rest. I believed if I could just give enough, they would never feel the lack. I never considered that giving too much could cost me something else. When it came time for college, I paid without hesitation. I didn't ask questions about degrees or plans. I told myself education was the key to a better life, one where they wouldn't have to break their backs like I did. I helped with their first apartments, carried boxes up narrow staircases, fixed leaky faucets, patched walls landlords ignored. I co-signed loans that kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what would happen if things went wrong. Every time they stumbled, I stepped in. I didn't let them feel the full weight of their mistakes. I smoothed things over, wrote checks, made calls. When they apologized, I waved it off. When they promised to do better, I believed them. I told myself this was fatherhood. This was love, being the safety net no matter how many times someone falls. What I didn't see was how the pattern was changing. Slowly, quietly, without warning, my help stopped being appreciated and started being expected. My advice stopped being considered and started being ignored. Somewhere along the line, respect turned into impatience. Gratitude turned into assumption. They didn't ask if I could help anymore. They assumed I would. And I let it happen, because love can make a man blind as hell. I confused sacrifice with worth. I believed the more I gave, the more valuable I would be in their lives. I didn't realize that constantly rescuing them taught them I would always be there, no matter how they treated me. I didn't notice when thank you stopped coming. I didn't notice when conversations became one-sided. I didn't notice when they stopped asking how I was doing. I told myself it was normal. Kids grow up. They get busy, they move on. I didn't want to be that bitter old man complaining about being unappreciated, so I stayed quiet, I stayed useful, I stayed available. Looking back now, I see it clearly. I gave them everything and called it love, never realizing I was slowly teaching them that my only value was what I could provide. And by the time I finally noticed, they had already learned that lesson far too well. The comments didn't start loud, they never do. Disrespect usually sneaks in quietly, dressed up as jokes and harmless remarks, the kind you brush off because you do not want to seem sensitive or dramatic. At first, it was just small things that felt almost silly to take seriously. A laugh when I pulled my old phone out at the table, a joke about how I still used it like it was 20 years ago. They would roll their eyes when I asked simple questions about new apps or online accounts, and I would laugh along with them, pretending it did not sting. I told myself this was just the generation gap, nothing more. But over time, those little moments started stacking up, one on top of another, like tiny cuts you ignore until you realize you are bleeding. Every time I struggled with something new, their patience ran thinner. They would sigh loudly, grab the phone out of my hand, and fix it without explaining, as if teaching me was a waste of their time. When I tried to offer advice about work or finances, advice built on decades of experience and hard lessons, they would smile politely and change the subject. It felt like being slowly pushed out of conversations I once led. They started saying things that sounded casual but carried weight if you listened closely. My son would tell me I was out of touch when I talked about saving money or taking fewer risks. My daughter would joke that I did not understand modern business, that the world worked differently now. They said it with confidence, like facts, not opinions. And every time they said it, something inside me shrank just a little. I tried to keep up, I really did. I watched videos, read articles, asked questions. I did not want to become the old man everyone talked over. But no matter how much effort I put in, it was never enough. The goalposts kept moving. And slowly, I realized it was not about technology or trends. It was about control. They began finishing my sentences, interrupting me, correcting me in front of others. At family gatherings, I noticed how they spoke to me compared to how they spoke to friends or colleagues. With them, there was respect. With me, there was impatience. It hurt in a way I did not know how to explain. Then the comments got sharper, no longer hidden behind jokes, no longer softened by laughter. My son told me flat out that I was out of touch, that I did not get how the world worked anymore. My daughter told me to just let them handle things, like I was a child who needed supervision. They said it like they were doing me a favor. Each time I swallowed my response, I told myself arguing would only make things worse. I reminded myself they were my kids, that they were young, that they would grow out of it. I chose peace over confrontation, or at least that is what I called it at the time. The final straw came at a family dinner, one of those dinners that start out normal and end up changing everything. We were sitting around the table, plates half full, conversation drifting from work to money to future plans. I listened more than I spoke, already used to being on the sidelines. At some point, I tried to share my thoughts, something simple, something meant to help. My son leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and smirked. He looked at my daughter, then back at me, and said it out loud, clear as day. He said I was basically useless now, and then added no offense like that made it okay. For a moment, the room went quiet. Then they laughed, not nervously, not awkwardly. They laughed like it was the most natural thing in the world to say. I did not laugh, I could not. I sat there, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth, feeling something heavy settle in my chest. I looked at their faces, at the confidence in their expressions, and I realized they truly believed it. This was not a slip of the tongue. This was how they saw me. I finished dinner in silence. I cleaned up in silence. I went to bed in silence. That night, I lay on my back staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak around me. Sleep would not come. My mind replayed every sacrifice I had ever made, every late night, every missed moment, every time I chose them over myself. And somewhere between the ticking clock and the weight of those memories, something inside me snapped. Not anger, not rage, clarity. I saw the pattern clearly for the first time. I understood how I had gone from being the foundation to being the punchline. And in that quiet moment, staring into the dark, I realized things could not continue the way they were. Something had to change. People think revenge starts with rage, with shouting and slammed doors and words you can never take back. Mine did not. Mine started with silence, the kind that settles deep in your chest when you finally stop trying to explain yourself to people who are not listening. After that night at the dinner table, I did not confront my children. I did not demand apologies. I did not give long speeches about respect or sacrifice. I did not threaten or warn them. I did something far more dangerous than all of that. I paid attention. I listened. I listened to the way they talked about money when they thought I was not fully engaged in the conversation. They spoke freely, casually, like everything was already mapped out. They talked about future plans with a confidence that did not come from their own achievements alone. It came from assumptions. I could hear it in their voices. The way they said things like, when the time comes or later on we will figure it out. They never said my name, but I was always there, hovering unspoken in every plan they made. I listened to how they discussed properties I had worked decades to build, speaking about them like they were already theirs to manage, sell, or leverage. I listened to the way my son talked about investments, explaining his ideas as if he were already in control, as if my experience no longer mattered. I listened to my daughters speak about security, about how she never really worried because things were covered. Covered by me, though she never said it out loud. The more I listened, the clearer it became. They were not planning with me, they were planning around me. In their minds, my role was already finished. I was a bridge they had crossed, something sturdy but no longer needed once you reached the other side. That realization hurt more than their jokes ever did, because it showed me the truth. They did not see my life's work as something I chose to share. They saw it as something they were entitled to. So I stayed quiet, I nodded, I let them talk. I let them reveal how they truly saw the future. And every word they spoke helped me make my own decision with more certainty. A few weeks later, on a morning that felt strangely calm, I walked into a small law office not far from my house. There was no dramatic moment, no heavy music playing in the background of my life, just a quiet room, a wooden desk, and a man who listened without interrupting. I told him everything, about my family, about my fears, about the way respect had slowly disappeared. He did not rush me. He did not judge my children or praise my decision. He simply explained the options clearly, carefully, like someone who understood the weight of what I was considering. For the first time in a long while, I felt heard. When the papers were placed in front of me, my hands did not shake. I read every line slowly. Trusts were restructured. Ownership was transferred. Safeguards were put in place that could not be undone by guilt or pressure. This was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of protection. Protection of everything I had built with my own hands, and my own years. When I signed my name, it felt final, but not heavy. It felt steady, like setting a boundary that should have existed a long time ago. Everything I built was protected now, not hidden, not destroyed, just secure. And the hardest part, the part that confirmed I was doing the right thing, was this simple truth. None of it had their names on it anymore. Not because I stopped loving them, but because I finally started respecting myself. After that day, after the papers were signed and the decision was sealed, I leaned fully into the role they had already written for me. The confused old man, the quiet background figure who nodded along and stayed out of the way. I did not fight it. I did not correct their assumptions. I wore it like a mask, one that cost me nothing because they already believed it fit. When they talked over me, I nodded slowly, as if I was struggling to keep up. When they dismissed my advice, I smiled and waved it off, letting them think I had finally accepted my place. I laughed at myself when they joked about my age. I asked fewer questions. I spoke less. I let my presence fade just enough to make them comfortable. Inside, I was not shrinking. I was sharpening. There is a strange calm that comes when you stop trying to prove yourself. I felt it settle in my chest, steady and clear. I no longer felt the need to defend my experience or explain my reasoning. I had already made my move. Everything after that was just patience. They grew bolder as my silence grew deeper. They talked freely about plans and ideas, about businesses they wanted to start and investments they wanted to chase. They spoke with excitement, with confidence, with the kind of certainty that comes from believing the safety net will always be there. They never asked me directly for anything. They did not have to. In their minds, it was already decided. Dad's assets would land in their laps sooner or later. It was only a matter of timing. I watched them from across the table, listening to the way they spoke about the future like it was already funded. I noticed how relaxed they were, how fearless their ideas sounded. Risk feels different when you believe someone else will absorb the fall. Sometimes they would ask my opinion, not because they wanted it, but because it felt polite. When I gave a careful answer, they would smile, thank me, and then do whatever they had already planned to do. Eventually, I stopped offering more than a simple nod. That seemed to please them even more. They thought I was letting go. They thought I was fadding. In reality, I was finally at peace. Real power does not announce itself. It does not raise its voice or demand attention. It waits, it watches, it understands timing. And timing was on my side. I let them dream. I let them talk about futures built on assumptions they never bothered to question. I let them believe control was already theirs. And while they planned out loud, I stayed quiet, knowing the truth they would one day have to face. The act was easy because it matched what they already saw. And every day I played it, I felt lighter. Because for the first time in years, I was not living for their approval. The meeting was their idea, which still makes me shake my head when I think about it. They said they wanted to talk about the future, said it like they were being responsible, like they were finally stepping up. I agreed without hesitation. I did not ask questions. I did not set conditions. I simply said yes and told them to pick the place. They chose a small conference room at a local office building, neutral ground, professional, the kind of place that makes people feel important. I showed up early. That was intentional. I wanted to sit with the silence before anyone else arrived. I sat at the head of the table, my hands folded neatly in front of me, my back straight. I looked calm because I was calm. The decision had already been made weeks ago. This was not a debate. This was a reveal. When my children walked in, they looked confident. My son was smiling, relaxed, already talking about ideas. My daughter carried a folder, looking proud of herself, like she was walking into a meeting she believed she already controlled. They greeted me casually, almost distracted, and took their seats without thinking twice about where I was sitting. Then the lawyer walked in. That was the moment everything shifted. I watched their smiles falter, just slightly at first, like a crack in glass. Confusion flickered across their faces. They looked at me, then at him, then back at me again. I could see the questions forming, but neither of them asked right away. I did not raise my voice. I did not clear my throat dramatically. I did not insult them or throw their words back in their faces. I simply began to speak, slow and steady, the way you do when you want every word to land exactly where it should. I told them the truth. I told them that everything I owned was no longer something they could expect. I explained that the properties I spent decades restoring, the accounts I built dollar by dollar, the legacy they assumed would automatically become theirs, had all been legally restructured. I explained that nothing had been taken from them, because nothing had ever belonged to them in the first place. As the lawyer calmly confirmed every word, I watched their faces drain of color. My son pushed his chair back and stood up, anger flashing in his eyes, the kind of anger that comes when entitlement meets reality. He demanded explanations, accused me of betrayal, asked how I could do this to my own children. My daughter did not stand. She sat there, staring at the table, tears sliding down her face. She did not argue at first. She just cried quietly, like someone realizing the ground beneath her was never as solid as she believed. I listened to both of them. I let them speak. I let the shock wash over them. And when they finally ran out of words, I spoke again. I told them I was still their father. I told them I still loved them. But I also told them something they had not heard from me in a very long time. I told them I deserved respect. I told them that my life's work was not a reward for insults or dismissal. I told them that being a parent did not mean being invisible. The room was quiet after that, heavy, honest. For the first time in years, they listened to me, not because they wanted something, not because it was convenient, but because they had to. The truth had walked into the room, and it was not leaving. They accused me of betrayal almost immediately, like that word had been sitting on their tongues, just waiting for the chance to escape. Hearing it come from them felt strange, almost hollow. Betrayal, coming from the same people who had been helping themselves to my time, my energy, my resources, and my patience for years, without ever stopping to ask if it was okay. It was ironic in a painful way, the kind that makes you realize how differently two sides can see the same story. My son's anger burned hot and loud. He paced the room, running his hands through his hair, raising his voice, as if volume could bend reality back into the shape he wanted. He told me I was ruining everything, that I was being selfish, that I was punishing them for growing up. He said family does not do this to each other, said a father should want his children to have everything. Each word was thrown like a weapon, aimed at my sense of duty, at the guilt he knew lived somewhere deep inside me. My daughter tried a different approach. She cried openly now, no longer hiding it. She talked about stress, about fear, about how she had always believed I would be there no matter what. She said she felt abandoned, said she did not understand why I was doing this now. Her voice cracked when she asked if I trusted them at all. Listening to her, I felt that old instinct rise up, the one that always pushed me to fix things, to make the pain go away. Then came the threats, subtle at first, then sharper. They talked about cutting ties, about how this would destroy our relationship, about how people would see me if they knew what I had done. They tried to paint a future where I would be alone, isolated, regretting this decision. It was clear they believed fear would work where anger and tears had not. But the papers did not care. They did not care about raised voices or shaking hands or promises made in panic. They did not care about guilt or family history or emotional appeals. The decisions were written in ink, signed with intention, and protected by law. And for the first time in my life, neither did I. That realization surprised me. I felt no rush to defend myself, no need to explain every choice I had ever made. I had already done the explaining in my own mind. What remained was something steady and unfamiliar: resolve. I told them something they were not ready to hear, something I had never said out loud before. I told them respect is not inherited. It is earned. It does not come automatically with a last name or a family connection. It comes from how you treat people, especially when you believe you have power over them. I told them I had spent years giving without limits, and all it taught them was that limits did not exist. I told them I was done confusing love with permission to be dismissed. I told them that my door was still open for a relationship built on mutual respect, not expectation. The room went quiet again, But this time it was different, heavier, more final. Their entitlement had nothing left to stand on, and as painful as it was to watch, I knew it had to happen. Revenge didn't feel loud the way people imagine it. There were no celebrations, no dramatic moments where I stood over anyone proving a point. It did not come with shouting or victory speeches. Instead, it arrived quietly, like a deep breath I did not know I had been holding for years. Real revenge, I learned, does not scream. It settles, it calms, it gives you your life back. For the first time in a long while, I slept through the night, not the shallow kind of sleep where you wake up tired, but real rest. The kind where your mind finally stops racing and your body loosens its grip on old tension. I stopped replaying conversations in my head. I stopped wondering what I should have said or done differently. There was nothing left to argue about. The decision had been made, and with it came a surprising sense of relief. I started taking care of myself in ways I had ignored for decades. Simple things at first, morning walks without rushing, regular meals instead of whatever I could grab between jobs. Doctor appointments I had postponed because someone else always needed something more urgently than I did. It felt strange to put myself first, almost selfish, until I realized how long I had been putting myself last. Then I started traveling, not expensive trips or flashy vacations, just quiet places that let me think, small towns, long drives, places where no one knew my name or my history. I sat in diners talking to strangers who listened when I spoke. I watched sunsets without checking my phone. I felt present in my own life again. I also became more careful about where I put my energy. I invested in people who respected me, people who valued my experience instead of dismissing it. I spent time with friends I had neglected, with neighbors who appreciated conversation, with people who did not measure my worth by what I could give them. Those relationships felt different, balanced, honest. Slowly, my children began to realize the truth, not all at once and not without pain. They saw that I was not falling apart. I was not begging for forgiveness or rushing to fix things. I was living, and that reality unsettled them more than any argument ever could. They began to understand something they had forgotten. I was never useless. I was never weak. I was the one who built the ground they had been standing on all along, and when I finally stepped back from holding it up, they felt the shift. That, more than anything, was what real revenge actually felt like: peace. Months passed after that meeting, and in those months, the house grew quiet in a way it never had before. The constant noise of expectation, the casual dismissal, the entitlement that had filled every corner of my life began to fade. At first, the silence felt heavy, almost punishing, as if the walls themselves were reminding me of what had been lost. But over time, it became something else entirely. It became space. Space to breathe, to think, and to rebuild my own sense of self, the parts that had been buried under decades of giving without pause. Then they reached out, not for money, not for property, not for the things they once assumed would be theirs. They reached out for understanding. Their calls were hesitant, almost timid, the kind you make when you are not sure the other person wants to hear from you. They asked questions about my decisions, about why I had done what I did, about the reasons behind every safeguard and signed paper. They wanted explanations, and I realized that maybe, for the first time in their lives, they were actually listening. I didn't shut the door. That would have been easy. That would have been a simple, quiet way to punish them, to say, "You've done enough." But I also didn't open it wide. I didn't immediately rush in with forgiveness or eager participation in their plans. I let them feel the weight of what had happened. I let them understand that my life was mine to lead, not theirs to direct. Boundaries replaced blind giving. I told them what I could and could not do, not as a lecture, not as a threat, but as a statement of truth. I reminded myself and them that my time, my energy, and my life were not infinite resources to be drawn from at will. Every decision, every conversation, every shared moment became intentional. I refused to fall back into old habits where my worth was measured by how much I provided. Conversation replaced entitlement. Where before there had been assumptions, there were now questions. Where before there had been commands, there were discussions. They started to consider my thoughts, my opinions, my feelings, and it was the strangest, most beautiful change. I realized that the respect I had longed for my entire life could not be demanded. It had to be cultivated. It grew slowly, painfully, but it grew all the same. And for the first time in years, we spoke as adults. No more hierarchy, no more invisible debts, no more taking and giving without awareness. We shared our plans and listened to one another. I could see them thinking, really thinking, about the consequences of their words, the weight of their assumptions, and the reality of life outside their own convenience. I felt something I hadn't felt in decades: dignity, not just in my own eyes, but in theirs too. They began to treat me as a person with agency, experience, and value beyond what I could provide. I began to see glimpses of the children I once raised, the ones who had listened, who had respected me not because of laws or possessions, but because they knew what it meant to earn and give respect in return. The road was long, much longer than I had anticipated. It required patience, forbearance, and a steadiness I did not know I had left. Some days I still felt the sting of the years that had gone by, the moments lost, the words unspoken. But I no longer carried them like chains. I carried them like lessons, reminders of why boundaries mattered, why dignity was priceless, and why silence, carefully chosen, could speak louder than any argument. As time passed, the interactions became more natural, less forced. Laughter returned to the house, but it was different now. It was lighter, freer, unburdened by expectation. We shared meals again, but with conversation that included everyone. We discussed decisions, not with entitlement, but with collaboration. My home, once filled with tension and quiet resentment, began to feel alive again, not with blind obedience, but with mutual recognition. I realized slowly that the long road back to dignity was not just about them. It was about me, reclaiming my life, my voice, my worth. It was about creating a space where love and respect coexisted, where generosity did not equate to invisibility, and where the mistakes of the past could teach rather than define us. It was the kind of victory that did not announce itself. There were no celebrations, no dramatic gestures, no need to prove anything to the world. It was quiet, steady, and real. And as I looked at them now, my children speaking with honesty and care, I understood something fundamental. Dignity, once taken seriously, transforms everything around it. It changes relationships, reshapes expectations, and restores balance in a way that nothing else can. We were not perfect, and the road ahead still held challenges. But for the first time in decades, I felt seen, not as a provider or a safety net, not as someone to be managed or dismissed, but as Richard Holloway, the man who had built, given, suffered, and survived. That recognition, slow and deliberate as it came, was worth every year, every tear, and every quiet battle fought in silence. And in that space, I finally felt like myself again. Here's the truth I want you to hear, one I wish I had understood decades ago, when the weight of choices and sacrifices first started pressing on me. Love without limits, unconditional in its giving, without boundaries or expectations, teaches people to take without respect. It is a harsh lesson, the kind you only learn by feeling the slow erosion of your own worth under the assumption that your presence and generosity will always be enough. I spent years thinking that being a good father meant giving everything: my time, my energy, my patience, my money, my very self. I believed that love could be measured by sacrifice, that devotion could be quantified in hours worked, bills paid, or opportunities provided. I thought that if I gave enough, if I gave long enough, my children would understand, appreciate, and eventually mirror the same respect and care. I thought that by bending, by yielding, by constantly absorbing their missteps, I was shaping them into responsible adults. I was wrong. What I failed to see for far too long was that love without limits can be mistaken for weakness. It can teach entitlement as easily as it teaches gratitude. It can build confidence, yes, but also a dangerous assumption that someone else's labor and heart are infinite, that their life exists for your convenience, that boundaries are optional. I gave them the world as I knew it, and in doing so, I inadvertently taught them that my value lay not in who I was, but in what I could provide. I had blurred the lines between love and utility, and in that confusion, I lost sight of something essential. Being a good father is not only about giving. It is also about knowing when to stand your ground, when to protect the integrity of what you have built, when to insist that respect is a requirement, not an expectation. It is about understanding that limits are not cruelty, that boundaries are not barriers, but that they are necessary structures to preserve self-worth and identity. I learned too late, through silence, through careful observation, and through deliberate action, that sometimes the most profound gift you can give your children is a father who is whole, who is respected, who is not diminished for their convenience. The moment I signed those papers, restructured everything I had built, and took control of my life back, I realized something vital. Dignity once lost is nearly impossible to reclaim. And yet, when wielded with patience and precision, silence can become one of the most powerful tools for preserving it. By stepping back, by allowing my children to reveal their assumptions, by letting them build fantasies around entitlement, I gave myself the advantage of clarity. I did not yell, I did not threaten, I did not storm through doors. I simply listened, observed, and acted in a way that ensured the respect I deserved was protected, even if it meant reshaping relationships that had long been taken for granted. Revenge, as many people imagine it, is loud and messy, but what I discovered is that real revenge, real justice, does not need to announce itself. It manifests in peace, in self-respect, in boundaries that are acknowledged and enforced. It lives in the confidence of knowing your worth, in the calm that comes from intentional action rather than reactive emotion. And when it is done right, it changes everything, not just for the one taking the stand, but for those who finally have to confront the consequences of their entitlement. I look back now not with bitterness, but with understanding. The lessons of my life, hard-won and painfully earned, are not only for me, they are warnings for anyone who assumes that endless giving equals unshakable love, that silence equals weakness, that sacrifice without self-preservation is the ultimate measure of devotion. It is not. Devotion is meaningless without respect. Love cannot thrive without boundaries. And children, no matter how dear, can only learn respect when it is demanded as a standard, not granted as a courtesy. I want those who hear this to understand, standing up for yourself is not betrayal. Protecting your life, your legacy, your dignity is not selfishness. Choosing silence over argument, observation over reaction, patience over rashness, these are not acts of cowardice. They are acts of survival, of foresight, of self-respect. The power of knowing when to act and how to act quietly is immeasurable. In the end, what I learned, and what I will never forget, is that being a father, being a parent, being someone who truly loves, is not about being endlessly available. It is not about absorbing every insult, fixing every mistake, and giving until there is nothing left of yourself. It is about teaching respect through action, modeling integrity through boundaries, and preserving your own life as fiercely as you protect those you love. Silence, patience, and self-respect, they became my allies. They allowed me to reclaim my life, rebuild my sense of worth, and finally be seen as the man I had always been beneath the sacrifices and the unnoticed work. My children may have thought I was gone. They may have assumed I was irrelevant. But the truth is, I was never gone. I was simply waiting until the moment I could show them, without anger, without theatrics, the real value of the life I had built, and the dignity I had refused to surrender. And that is the lesson I carry with me, the one I wish I had understood sooner, the one I will never forget. Love without limits teaches entitlement, sacrifice without boundaries teaches disrespect, and silence, when used with intention, can change everything. It can protect what is yours. It can restore balance. It can finally make people listen. I may have learned it late, but I learned it well. And in that knowledge, I found freedom, strength, and the peace of knowing that, for the first time in decades, I was truly alive in my own life. If you're listening to this and feel invisible in your own family, I want you to hear me carefully, as though I am speaking directly to the part of you that has been ignored, dismissed, or taken for granted. I know that feeling all too well, the one that creeps into your chest when words meant to wound are thrown casually across the dinner table, when jokes are made at your expense, when years of dedication are met with laughter or indifference. It is a slow, insidious kind of hurt, the type that whispers over time, "You don't matter anymore," until you begin to wonder if maybe it's true. I promise you, it is not. Your worth does not expire with age. It does not matter if your hair is thinning, if your back aches, if your hands bear the marks of decades of work. Your value is not tied to your productivity in the eyes of others, nor is it measured by how much you can provide at a given moment. It is intrinsic. It is who you are, the sum of all your years, your experiences, your sacrifices, your lessons, your integrity, and no one has the right to make you feel otherwise. Your value does not vanish because someone else forgot your sacrifices. People will assume, they will take, they will expect. They will not always see the quiet nights you stayed up worrying, the long hours you labored so others could thrive, the countless small acts of love that went unnoticed. That does not diminish their worth, and it does not diminish yours. What matters is the recognition of what you know you have given and what you have built with your own hands and heart. Sometimes the strongest move you'll ever make is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is not vindictive in a way that seeks revenge through confrontation or chaos. Sometimes the strongest move is quiet. It is deliberate. It is measured. It is the act of taking control of your own life in a way that cannot be undone, a way that preserves what is yours, protects what you have worked for, and honors the life you have lived. For me, that moment came when I signed the papers. A lawyer, a small office, a few hours spent making decisions that would secure decades of work. There were no shouts, no accusations hurled across a table, no grand proclamations of victory. There was only intention, clarity, and calm. The world did not tremble. My children did not understand immediately. But slowly, as the truth settled, they began to see me differently. They began to understand that respect is not automatic, that entitlement has limits, and that one's life and legacy are to be honored, not assumed. Silence, when used with intention, carries its own power. It forces reflection. It allows observation. It gives people space to reveal who they truly are when they think no one is paying attention. And it gives you space to protect yourself, to assert boundaries, to reclaim the dignity that has been chipped away over years of unquestioned sacrifice. If you feel invisible, I want you to know that being quiet does not mean being weak. Waiting does not mean giving up. Choosing the right moment to act, even if it is a quiet act like signing the papers, like setting boundaries, like taking control of what is rightfully yours, is one of the most profound demonstrations of strength you can ever make. It teaches lessons that words alone cannot. It shows others the depth of your resolve, the seriousness of your worth, and the undeniable fact that your life is yours to lead. There is a peace that comes with this kind of decision, a clarity that no argument, no confrontation, no desperate attempt to be heard can provide. For years, I had lived under the assumption that my role as a father meant endless sacrifice, unquestioned availability, silent suffering. I learned the hard way that love without boundaries can be mistaken for weakness, that generosity without limits can breed entitlement, and that one's own dignity cannot be assumed. It must be guarded, preserved, and when necessary, reclaimed. The moment I reclaimed mine, I slept better, I laughed more freely. I lived fully in my own life for the first time in decades. My children, confronted with the reality that nothing was theirs to take by assumption, began to listen, began to see, began to respect. And in that, I found something that no argument or tearful speech could have ever given me: peace. So if you feel unseen, overlooked, or undervalued in your own home, in your own family, remember this: your worth is not defined by anyone else's recognition. Your value is not measured by what you can give to those who take for granted. And sometimes, the most powerful, most transformative act you can make is the quiet one, the one that protects your life, your work, and your dignity. Sign your own papers, set your boundaries, claim your peace. Let the truth do the talking. And when it finally reaches them, when they begin to understand the weight of what you have built and the strength it took to protect it, you will know with a certainty that nothing can shake, that you were never invisible, you were never irrelevant, and you were never useless. Your life, your sacrifices, and your dignity are yours to protect. And that, above all, is the legacy that cannot be stolen.